the midnight courier. The front desk phone rang at 2 a.m. The caller ID said LOBBY. I was the only person in the lobby. I need to tell you about the rose. Is first because the rose is our part of it in a way that only became clear later. The day shift had gone overboard with the Valentine's Day arrangements. Massive bouquets on every surface in the lobby. 50 dozen red rose is minimum, the kind of volume that stops being romantic and becomes something closer to oppressive. By the time I sat down for the night odd, it at 11 the scent had saturated the air completely, thick and sweet and slightly metallic, the way very dense floral arrangements get when they've been in a warm room for hours. I had been breathing it for 3 hours when the phone rang. I mention this because the smell is part of the sequence of events, and because what happened to it later is one of the details I keep coming back to. The night audit at a boutique hotel in downtown Chicago is not a dramatic job. Between 1 and 5 in the morning, it is, under normal circumstance, is an exercise in solitude. The hum of the lobby vending machines, the occasional structural settling of a century-old building, the ledger work, the quiet. The lobby was empty. The glass entry doors were locked against a blizzard that had been building since midnight, the temperature outside sitting at -10, the kind of cold that makes the city contract and go silent. No foot traffic, no late arrivals expected, nothing moving in the street visible through the frosted glass. I was alone with 50 dozen roses and a ledger that needed closing. The phone rang at 2:14 a.m. I know the time exactly because I looked at the desk clock. When I jumped, the sound was sudden and very loud in the silence, and I caught my knee on the underside of the desk, hard enough that I was still feeling it an hour later. The caller ID display read LOBBY. I looked at the lobby. The velvet chairs were empty. The staircase was empty. There is no secondary phone in the lobby of that hotel. No house phone that a guest could use, no phone at all, except the one on the desk in front of me. I picked up the receiver. The sound before the voice was like wind moving through a long enclosed space, the kind of acoustic effect you get in tunnels or in very deep stairwells, a sustained hollow rushing that had no business coming through a telephone line. Then the voice, and I want to be specific about the quality of it, because it is not something I have been able to adequately describe in the 2 years since it did not sound like it was coming through the earpiece in the normal way that phone audio arrives. It sounded like the vibration was happening at the air drum rather than traveling to it, as though the sound was being generated inside the ear rather than outside it. A wet, slightly labored quality. A delivery for room 304. Room 304 was out of order. Burst radiator pipe. No guests for the week, locked and tagged in the system. I told the caller we didn't accept deliveries after midnight and asked who was calling. The line went dead with a click that was sharper than phone clicks usually are, a finality to it. I sat with the receiver in my hand for a moment, and then I put it down and I pulled up the guest registry and confirmed what I already knew about 304, and I told myself it was a prank from the security team at one of the adjacent buildings, which was the most plausible explanation and one I almost believed. 10 minutes later, I heard the scraping at the front doors. A slow, deliberate sound against the glass and through the frosted ornate panes, a silhouette, a figure standing directly against the exterior of the doors, close enough that I should have been able to see breath fagging the glass, which I could not, and close enough that the streetlight behind them should have given me some detail, which it didn't. I came out from behind the desk. He was tall, the proportions slightly off in the way you notice when something is subtly wrong with scale, wearing a courier's uniform that was wrong for the decade, heavy wool, faded the cut of something from the ears, a wide-brimmed cap with the head bowed beneath it. In his hands, pressed flat against the glass, a bouquet of roses. Black. Not darkened red, not deep burgundy black and encased in ice, crystalline and thick over every petal, the kind of ice that forms over a long period in deep cold rather than the surface frost of brief exposure. As I stood 10 feet from the door watching a large flake of ice detached from one of the stems and fell to the snow-covered step below, and the sound it made when it hit was wrong for the size of it, too sharp, too resonant like something larger shattering. The cold radiating through the glass from his proximity was palpable at 10 feet. Not the ambient cold of the storm outside bleeding through the thermal barrier of the doors, a localized directional cold, coming specifically from where he was standing, dropping the temperature in the entry area several degrees. I asked if I could help him. He didn't move. I could see condensation forming on the glass at his eye level, freezing instantly into an opaque web of ice crystals in the shape of his breath, except that breath requires a thermal differential to be visible, and whatever he was breathing was cold enough that it was freezing against the glass rather than evaporating. I told him deliveries could be accepted after 6 a.m. and that the hotel was closed to non-guests. He raised his head slowly, the cap brim coming up, and under it was shadow, not the shadow of a brim but an absence, a darkness where the face should have been that the streetlight didn't penetrate. The moment his head moved, the rose is around me, the lobby arrangements, the 50 dozen red roses that had been saturating the air for hours turned. The scent curdled not gradually but in a single moment, sweet to rotten, living to dead, the smell of flowers that have been decomposing for a long time, replacing the smell of flowers in full bloom. He turned and walked in. The blizzard and the light swallowed him, and he was gone. I went to the security monitor and pulled the exterior camera feed, and found exactly what I have been trying to explain to myself for 2 years without success. The snow in front of the doors, clearly visible on the feed, undisturbed. No footprints approaching. No footprints leading away. An unbroken surface of snow directly in front of the glass where a man had been standing with his hands pressed against it 30 seconds before. I spent the next 2 hours at the desk with my hand on the flash light we kept for emergencies. At 4 a.m., the temperature in the lobby dropped and I could see my own breath. The rose is all of them, every arrangement on every surface began to go. I watched it happen, which I cannot explain as a natural process because it happened too fast and too uniformly, petals curling inward color, leaving the flowers going from red to brown to black in a progression that takes days of decomposition compressed into minutes. The dry, papery sound of them dropping to the surface is they were arranged on one after another across the whole rim simultaneously. The power went out. The hum stopped, the lights went, the lobby went completely dark and completely silent and stayed that way. The backup generator did not come on. I had the flashlight, but I did not turn it on immediately, which I am not sure I can explain except to say that there are moments when some part of you understands that what you will see if you create light is worse than the dark, and that instinct held me still for longer than was rational. From the staircase, a footfall wet and heavy, followed by a scraping sound, something being dragged across the marble. Then, again, descending, coming off the stairs and onto the lobby floor, moving toward the desk. I turned the flashlight on. He was at the foot of the staircase. Inside the building, the doors had not opened. I would have heard the lock, heard the alarm, felt the pressure change and the cold rush of outside air. He was inside, and the doors had not opened, and the alarms had not sounded. The frost on his uniform was thick and layered, the kind of accumulation that takes sustained exposure to extreme cold over a long period. The bouquet in his hands had changed. The ice was melting, not from warmth but from something else, and what was running from the stems and dripping onto the marble floor was dark, thick, and falling with the slow viscosity of something much colder and denser than water. He raised his head, and the shadow under the cap brim was the same shadow, the same absence, the face that the darkness occupied rather than the darkness occupying the face. He raised one gloved hand toward me holding a red envelope. I threw the flashlight and ran. I heard it hit the marble and I didn't hear anything else, and I was in the back office with the dead bolt thrown and the filing cabinet against the door before I had processed the sequence of my own movements. I backed against the far wall and slid down it and sat on the floor with my knees pulled up. I waited for the door. I waited for the handle, for the weight of something pushing against the other side, for any of the sounds that would tell me what was happening on the other side of that door. The cold came instead, under the door gap across the carpet, reaching me where I sat. And then the voice not from outside the door, not muffled through wood and filing cabinet, but from the air beside my left ear, from the specific proximity of something kneeling next to me in the dark of a room I had locked from the inside. My name, a seasonal greeting, delivered in the same wet, resonant whisper that had come through the telephone 2 hours before, as though the earpiece and the air beside my ear were the same medium, as though the distance it had traveled to reach me didn't matter and had never mattered. I sat against that wall until 6:30, when the morning manager knocked on the office door. The power had returned. The lobby, when I came out, was covered in blackened petals, and the smell of decomposition that I can still locate in my sensory memory immediately and completely if I encounter very large floral arrangements in warm enclosed spaces. The manager was asking me questions I wasn't processing. I was looking at the front desk. At the center of the ledger I had left open at the desk, a small red envelope sealed with black wax, sitting in a position that required someone to have placed it there deliberately and with care. I didn't touch it. The police came and took my statement and reviewed the security footage, which showed the lights going out and showed me throwing the flashlight at an empty section of lobby floor and running. It showed no one else in the building at any point during the shift. The envelope was logged as evidence, and I was told they would be in touch, and I have never heard from them since, and I do not know what happened to the envelope or whether anyone opened it. I quit that morning. I have worked day shifts since then, in buildings without lobbies, without overnight exposure to a phone that calls from the same room you are sitting in, and a voice that does not travel through the medium it is using but arrives directly at the place it is intended to reach. I don't know who the delivery was for in room 304. I don't know what was in the envelope. I have thought about the fact that he came back, that standing at the doors was not sufficient, that coming inside was necessary, that whatever he needed to deliver required my presence and my acceptance, and I have thought about what declining the envelope cost me versus what accepting it would have cost, and I have not been able to determine which was the better outcome. What I know is that the roses died before he came through the door not after, and that the roses dying was the real announcement, the signal that something was changing in the space before the change arrived. And I know that on cold nights in February, when the wind finds the gaps in my apartment windows and the radiator ticks through its cycles, the smell finds me sometimes not rose, is but what rose is become the end stage of them, the smell of something that was beautiful and is past that now and is patient about what comes next. The envelope is somewhere. Someone opened it or someone didn't. I think about that sometimes. I think about the wax seal and the red paper and the careful deliberate way it had been placed in the center of the ledger, centered with a precision that suggested it had been placed by something that understood presentation, that understood the weight of a formal delivery and the significance of completing it correctly. 30 years of Valentine's days before that night, and 30 some after, and whatever the envelope contained was important enough to travel through a blizzard at -10 degrees, locked glass doors, down a marble staircase int, a locked room to kneel beside me in the dark and say my name. Whatever was in it was addressed to someone. I have spent 2 years being grateful that I don't know whether that someone was a guest in room 304 or the person sitting at the front desk with his hand on a flashlight, waiting for the morning and trying very hard not to think about the caller ID that had read LOBB. Why, when there was no one in the lobby but me. The table for two. The reservation confirmation arrived the exact second I thought about the restaurant. I had never searched for it. I had never told anyone about it. I hadn't even finished the thought. I want to be up front about the thing that should have stopped me, because I have spent months reconstructing the sequence of decisions that led to that night, and the first one is the most damning. I was sitting at my work computer on a Tuesday afternoon staring at a spreadsheet, and I thought, not typed, not searched, just thought that Laura would be the perfect place to take my wife Sarah for our 5th anniversary. Laura was the kind of restaurant that existed mostly as a rumor in the city, no phone number, no web site, a waitlist that supposedly measured in years rather than months, the sort of place that gets mentioned in conversations about places you will probably never go. I had heard of it, the way you hear of things you file under aspirational and don't persist. I had not searched for it. I had not spoken it aloud. I had formed a thought about it privately in the silence of my own head, and in the time it took the thought to complete itself, my email notification chimed. A blank sender filled. No name, no address, just the timestamp and a message in clean, elegant script. Your table for two is confirmed February 14th, 8 p.m. Coordinate. It's below the text that I mapped to an alleyway in the historic district. I sat looking at this for a long time. I told myself it was a targeted algorithm, some intersection of location data and browsing patterns. I wasn't aware of a coincidence that only felt like more because I wanted it to be more. I told myself this, and I forwarded the confirmation to Sarah, and I told her to clear her calendar because I had managed something special. I wanted to impress her badly enough to stop asking the obvious question, which was how any system knew what I had thought before I had acted on it. We arrived at 7:55 on a night that was cold enough that our breath clouded immediately, and Sarah pulled close against my arm, walking down the alley. The gas lamp above the iron door was the only light source. The door opened before I knocked, before I reached for it, before we were close enough that someone looking through a peep hole would have had a good angle. The man in the white tuxedo had a stillness to him that I processed as professional composure, and later understood differently, the stillness of something that does not need to adjust its posture, because it is not managing the small involuntary movements that living bodies manage constantly. He said our table was ready in a voice that was smooth and completely without affect, and he led us inside. The interior was beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful while simultaneously being wrong, the proportions slightly off, the distance is between surface is inconsistent with what the exterior of the building suggested was possible, the candlelight absorbed by the crimson velvet walls rather than reflected from them, so that the room seemed to generate its own darkness independent of the light source. Within it, we were seated at a circular table in the center. The room was full of couples. Every table occupied, every seat taken, 40 people or more in an enclosed space, and no sound. Not reduced sound, not the low murmur of a room where people are being quiet. No sound. The complete acoustic absence of 40 people existing in the same space. I looked at the adjacent table. A man holding a wine glass to his lips. The glass had not moved. Across from him, a woman whose head was thrown back in the position of laughter, mouth open, face ranged in the expression of someone mid-laugh frozen, not completing the action, stopped at a frame. I watched for a full minute. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. I watched carefully for the chest movement that happens even when people are very still, the involuntary rise and fall that you can always detect if you look for it. Nothing. What? Sarah said. She felt strange. I told her it was an avant-garde concept performance art because I needed it to be that more than I needed to be. And she nodded in the way she nods when she is accepting my explanation while not fully believing it. The waiter appeared beside our table without my hearing any approach. 2 silver clock is placed simultaneously, lifted simultaneously. Food that looked precisely and technically perfect under the candlelight, arranged with the kind of care that takes significant skill. And no smell. I leaned toward my plate and inhaled and got nothing but suppressed scent, not the ambient smell of a kitchen near, by simply the absence of any olfactory information from objects that should have been producing it. The reflection appeared when Sarah leaned forward over her clock. The polished silver curved surface, convex, distorting, and in it, her reflection, which was wrong. Sarah's face over the plate was concentrated, slightly frowning, leaning to examine the food. The reflection in the clock was smiling. A wide, comprehensive smile, the kind of smile that is more of the face than most expressions do. More than Sarah's face typically used for anything. I looked at, her face looked at, the reflection looked back. When I looked directly at the reflection, it had resolved back into a reasonable match for her expression. I told myself it was the curvature of the silver, the distortion of the convex surface, the dim light. I told myself this specifically and carefully because the alternative required me to act, and I was not ready to act yet. She said she needed to use the restroom. She walked through a velvet-draped archway at the back of the room. I watched her go. I waited for the particular readjustment that happens when someone leaves a table and the remaining person recalibrates their comfort with the space, and instead what happened was the specific dread of realizing you have made a significant error and that the window for correcting it may have just closed. I waited 5 minutes. The jazz looped. I recognized it, looping the same phrase, the same erratic tempo, returning to itself in a way that live music or even a long recording doesn't, the repetition of something very short playing on a cycle. The frozen couples remained. Not a single head had moved. The wine glass at the adjacent table had not moved. I went through the archway, a hallway narrow lined with doors smelling of milk, and something chemical underneath it that I later identified as formaldehyde by looking up the specific smell because I needed to know. The hallway was the wrong length for the building I had looked at. The exterior I had a reasonable sense of the footprint, and this hallway extended further than the building should have permitted. I opened doors. Brick wall. A closet with cleaning supplies, and the chemical smell much stronger. More doors, more hallway, the geometry refusing to resolve into anything that corresponded to the space I knew I was physically inside. At the end, a door ajar, light through. The gap, white and harsh, fluorescent, clinical, completely different from the candlelit warmth of the dining room. I pushed it open. 2 women sitting across from each other at a metal table in a white-tiled room. Both Sarah. Identical in every detail I could assess simultaneously: the black dress, the updo with the same strands escaping at the same place, is the freckle on the left cheek bone that I have kissed 10,000 times and know the location of without looking. Both completely still facing each other, staring at each other's face with the intensity of people examining something they are trying to understand. I stood in the doorway and I did not know how long I stood there before they turned, because the turning was simultaneous and the synchronization of it was exact in the way that only a single system moving two parts can be exact, not like two people moving at the same time, like one thing operating two bodies on the same signal. The Sarah on the left said my name in the voice I know, in the specific frequency and timbre and inflection that belongs to her, and there was real fear in it, the kind that cannot be performed convincingly, and I have gone back to that moment many times. The Sarah on the right said my name in my voice. My exact voice, my register, my specific way of saying my own name that I have never consciously analyzed, because you don't analyze the sound of yourself until you hear it coming from somewhere it cannot come from. And then in my voice from her face, the words the waiter had used when we arrived, "Your table is ready." The Sarah on the left was crying silent tears, her face arranged in expression of recognition and terror. The Sarah on the right picked up a fork. I ran. I am not going to pretend there was any decision-making involved. The body chose, and I was moving through the hallway and through the velvet curtain before anything that could be called thought had occurred. The dining room, the couples all turned as I crossed it. The heads that had not moved in the time I had been watching them now oriented in my direction, the dead glass eyes tracking my movement toward the door. I hit the iron door and went through it and ran until I couldn't any more. Sarah was asleep in our bed when I got home. She woke up confused, asking why we weren't at the restaurant and what time it was. She had no memory of the alley or the door or the man in the white tuxedo or any of it. I held on to her for a long time, and I told her I had gotten the date wrong, that I would explain in the morning. I saw the therapist. I accepted the framework of a severe dissociative episode, a stress-induced psychotic break, a temporary disruption of reality testing. I accepted it because it was the framework that permitted me to go back to living normally, and because I needed to go back to living normally. But I watch her sleep sometimes. I watch the specific rhythm of it, the rise and fall, that you learn the pattern of when you have slept beside someone for 5 years. And there are nights when the rhythm stops. Not for a breath, not for the brief pause that normal sleep sometimes produces, is a full stop, 10 or 15 seconds of absolute stillness, the chest not moving, the breathing simply absent. And then it resumes. And when it does, the exhale that comes out doesn't have her sound. It has the sound that my breath makes, my particular respiratory signature, coming out of her body while she sleeps. I have not said this to the therapist. I have not said it to Sarah. I have been sitting with it for months, trying to determine whether what I am hearing is real or whether I am still in the aftermath of whatever happened that night, still finding distortions in the surface. Is around me the way I found the wrong smile in the silver clock. I cannot determine it. I can only tell you that I watch her, and that most nights the rhythm is hers, and that I have learned to wait through. The pause is with a specific quality of attention that I did not have before February 14th, and that every time her breathing resumes in her own voice, I release something that I have been holding since the exhale before, and that I am very tired, and that I have not stopped watching. The crimson envelope. I found the first envelope taped to the inside of my shower curtain. Dead bolt-locked chain on 3rd floor, blizzard outside. I live alone. I had been home for 4 minutes. I need to establish the physical facts before anything else, because the physical facts are what make this not a story about fear, but a story about impossibility, and the difference matters. 3rd floor, walk up, older building, 1 entrance, the front door with a dead bolt and a chain, both of which I engage every time I come home without exception, because I am a woman living alone in a city, and that habit is so deep, it is automatic. 3 windows in the apartment, all of them old sash style with the original hard, were none of them accessible from the exterior without a ladder that would be visible from the street and audible from inside. No fire escape on the building's face, which I had confirmed when I moved in because I wanted to know my exit options. I had been inside the apartment for 4 minutes, time enough to drop my bag, hang my coat, and go to the bathroom when I found the first envelope. I am telling you this because I spent the first 20 minutes after finding it trying to construct a scenario in which a person could have placed it there after I had locked the door, and I could not construct one, and that failure is the beginning of everything that followed. I had just finished a 14-hour shift in the pediatric trauma unit, the kind of shift that doesn't leave you with much capacity for anything beyond the most basic self-maintenance: shower, food, sleep, in that order. There was an ancestor outside the city, effectively closed the wind, finding every gap in the old window frames, and making the apartment creak in the specific way it did in bad weather that I had stopped noticing. I went to the bathroom without turning the main light on because I had a migraine beginning behind my left eye, and the hallway light was enough. I pulled the shower curtain closed by feel and reached for the faucet, and my hand touched something that was not the faucet and not the curtain paper, thick and stiff, taped to the inside surface of the curtain at eye level. I turned the light on. A crimson envelope, square, heavy card, stuck, no writing on the exterior, sealed with dark red wax pressed into a shape I didn't recognize, irregular, asymmetrical, like a star that had been distorted under pressure, taped to the inside of a closed shower curtain in a locked apartment where I had been the only occupant for the 12 hours before I left for work that morning. I stood in the bathroom with water running and my hand on this envelope, and I went through the options the way I go through differentials at work, methodically, before allowing myself to react. The building superintendent had a master key but no access to the chain. No one had been given a spare. No one from work would have my address, let alone access to my apartment, and none of those explanations accounted for how an envelope reached the inside of a closed curtain anyway. I opened it because knowing was less unbearable than not knowing. A single sheet of white paper folded once. Taped to the center of it, a lock of hair. Long, slightly wavy, the same curl pattern as mine, the same texture but white. Not gray, not highlighted, not bleached. White with the brittleness of something very old, dry, in the way that hair becomes dry when it has been detached from its source for a long time. I held it next to my own hair, and the match in everything except color was exact in a way that random similarity doesn't produce. I threw the envelope away. I checked every window, locked all of them. The old latch is exactly as I had left them. I checked the front door, dead. Bolt thrown, chain engaged, no sign of the frame having been worked. I walked every room. I was alone. I told myself this clearly, and went to the kitchen to heat up the soup I had left in the refrigerator, and opened the microwave. Another envelope on the rotating plate. I need you to understand the specific impossibility of this one, because it is the detail I keep returning to. The microwave was closed. A closed microwave door is not a space that an envelope enters accidentally. It requires the door to be opened. The envelope placed the door closed in sequence by someone with a physical hand in my kitchen. I had been in the kitchen approximately 8 minutes before going to the bathroom. I had not opened the microwave at that point. The envelope was inside a closed appliance in an apartment that was locked from the inside, and that I had just searched completely. I reached in and took it because by this point the compulsion to understand what was happening was stronger than the reasonable instruction to leave it alone. Same paper, same seal, same jagged star. Inside, on the folded sheeted tooth. Small, slightly yellowed, the specific shape of a primary molar. A child's tooth. I dropped it and it hit the linoleum with a small sound, and I stood looking at it on the floor, and I was shaking in the specific way that the body shakes when the threat cannot be located, when the danger is present but has no source it will resolve in. I called 911. The line connected and a synthesized voice said delivery in progress and disconnected. I tried 3 more times and got the same result. I went through the front door. The deadbolt was not warm, had the specific heat of metal that has been exposed to an external heat source, had enough that pulling back was involuntary. I looked at the door frame. Dark red wax was seeping through. The gap between the door and the jamb, the same color as the envelope sills, bubbling slightly as it made contact with the cooler air and hardening as I watched, filling the gap layer on layer, the door becoming continuous with the frame as the wax cooled and set. I put my shoulder against it anyway. Nothing. Not the resistance of a stuck door that gives under sustained pressure, nothing. The absolute solidity of something that has been structurally sealed. The sound from the living room ceiling started while I was still at the door. Metal underweight, the flex and scrape of something moving inside the ventilation duct. Work heavy enough that the duct was deforming slightly under it. The sounds coming from further away and progressing toward the living room, return vent in a trajectory I could follow by ear. I went to the doorway of the living room and watched the vent grate. The screws were turning, not being turned by a visible tool, rotating on their own, slowly, in sequence, dropping to the carpet, one by one, soft impacts on the pile. The grate swung down on its last connection and hung there, and the duct above it was dark, and the scraping stopped, and the apartment went quiet. Something came out of the vent and landed on the coffee table. An envelope much larger than the others, the size of a large book, the wax seal covering most of the back, the jagged star pressed deep into it. It landed with a sound that was too heavy for paper, the solid impact of something with significant mass. I crossed the room and I do not fully understand why, except that the thing that was in the duct had not come through the opening yet, and this was still in the category of objects I could investigate rather than things I needed to run from. I broke the seal. A Polaroid photograph. Me asleep in my bed, shot from above the angle of the ceiling, looking straight down, my face visible and recognizable, the specific way I sleep on my left side with one hand under the pillow. The timestamp on the white border was in red ink. Today's date. The time was 5 minutes before the timestamp on my phone when I checked it. Someone had been above my bed 5 minutes ago taking a photograph of me sleeping. The duct above the bedroom was connected to the duct system that ran to the living room return. The thing that had been in the duct had been above my bed room 5 minutes before it arrived at the vent grate. I looked up at the open vent. A hand pale, the fingers too many jointed, the nails darkened, gripping the lower edge of the opening from inside, the specific grip of something that is about to descend rather than exploring. I went into the bathroom and locked the door and put the laundry hamper against it and sat on the edge of the tub. That was 3 hours ago. I am a pediatric trauma nurse, which means I have training in remaining functional under acute stress, and I am using all of it. The scraping in the walls has been quiet for the last 40 minutes. The bath room temperature is low enough that I can see my breath. The lights went out an hour ago and I am typing this by phone flashlight. I have tried emergency service is 6 times and received the same synthesized message each time. The building is sealed by the blizzard in a way that means no foot traffic outside, no one to hear if I could get a window open, which I cannot because this bathroom has no window. 5 minutes ago, I heard a sound at the base of the door. I put the phone flashlight on the gap. Dark red wax is moving slowly under it, the same material from the door frame, filling the gap between the door and the floor from the outside, sealing me in the way the front door was sealed in the same slow, methodical completeness. Not quickly, not urgently at the pace of something that is not in any hurry. Because it is certain about the outcome and has the time to be thorough about the process. I am posting this because it is the only transmission available to me, and because if this is the last record, then I want there to be one. I am a methodical person. I have documented what happened in the sequence it happened, and I have not exaggerated any detail, because I am trained to observe accurately under pressure, and that training does not leave when the situation is personal. What is outside this door came in through. An impossibility left evidence in sealed space. Was present in my apartment before I arrived and after I locked the door, and has been patient in a way that suggests either confidence or a relationship to time that is different from mine. I do not know what the envelopes were intended to communicate as a sequence, the hair, the tooth, the photograph. I have worked in pediatric trauma long enough to know that objects associated with children in contexts like these carry specific implications that I am trying not to follow to their conclusion. The wax has filled the gap completely. The door is now sealed on both sides. I don't know what happens when it is being patient. I am still here. I am still typing. The flashlight battery is at 11%. I am thinking about my patients, the ones from today's shift, the ones who came through, and the ones who didn't, and I am applying the same principle I apply at work. When the situation is critical, you stay present, you stay functional, you document what you observe, and you do not stop until you cannot continue. That is all I know how to do. So I am doing it. I am here. The temperature is still dropping. The wax has completely sealed the door. Outside, the blizzard is still going. If someone reads this, the envelopes are crimson. The seal is a jagged, asymmetrical star. Do not open them. I opened 3 of them, and I do not know if the opening was what it was waiting for, what the sequence was building toward, whether the photograph was a demonstration of proximity or a record of something that had already been decided before I came home tonight. I don't know. I know that my hair on that paper was white and old and dry, and that it was mine in every detail except the color and the age, and that whatever age produces hair like that is not an age I have reached yet. And I know that it already had the photograph before it delivered the envelope, which means it had already been above my bed before I found the first envelope in the shower, which means the sequence did not begin with the envelopes. The sequence began before I got home, possibly before I left. I don't know when it started watching. Phone at 8%. I am still here.